Something you do every single week in your own kitchen, something you do specifically because you are being practical, saving money, not wasting food is quietly and systematically building the conditions for one of the deadliest cancers in the human body. Not processed junk food, not cigarettes, not alcohol, reheating leftovers. For specific foods, for specific chemical reactions, and a direct documented connection to pancreatic cancer, the cancer with a 5-year survival rate of just 12%. 12%. Let that number settle for a moment. That means if 100 people receive a pancreatic cancer diagnosis today, 88 of them will be dead within 5 years. Not because treatment failed, not because they gave up, but because by the time the first symptom appears, the dull back pain, the jaundice, the weight loss that seems to come from nowhere, the disease has already been developing silently for years, sometimes for decades. And what feeds that silent development, what creates the chemical conditions for it, is sitting in your refrigerator right now, waiting to be reheated for tomorrow's lunch. Here is what should make you angry. This is not new science. The chemistry behind what happens when these 4 specific foods are reheated has been documented in peer-reviewed scientific literature. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, has classified the specific compounds these foods produce as probable human carcinogens. That classification is published, that science exists. And yet nobody told you, not your doctor, not the nutritionist on the morning news, not the health column in any magazine you have ever read, because there is no profit in telling you not to reheat your spinach. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly which 4 foods are the most dangerous to reheat. I am going to show you in plain, direct language what they chemically transform into the second time heat touches them. And I am going to explain what that transformation does inside your body across months and years of repeated exposure. This is not fear-mongering. This is biochemistry, and you deserve to know it. Stay with me, because when we get to the second food on this list, I want you to remember this moment, that one will stop you cold. Not because it is dangerous in some obvious way, but because you have been eating it specifically because you believed it was protecting you. And that quiet betrayal, that specific reversal, is the one I cannot let pass without telling you. And when we reach the 4th food, please do not click away before we get there, because that one operates through a completely different mechanism than the others. The risk is different, the consequence is different, and the solution is the simplest of all 4, but only if you know it. In time, I will see you there. I am a surgical oncologist. I have spent over 2 decades specializing in gastrointestinal and pancreatic disease. I have sat across from patients in consultation rooms more times than I am able to count and delivered one of the hardest sentences in medicine. The cancer is in your pancreas. I have watched what that sentence does to a person, to their spouse, to their adult children sitting in the chairs against the wall. I have watched a 67-year-old grandmother reach for her husband's hand the moment I said it and not let go for the rest of that appointment. And every single time I have asked myself the same question: what could I have said to that person 5 years earlier that might have changed this moment? Because pancreatic cancer does not appear overnight. It develops slowly, silently, across years of accumulated chemical insults to a gland that gives you no signal while it is being damaged. By the time it announces itself, by the time you feel something is wrong, we are, almost always, already behind. I had a patient, 64 years old, retired civil engineer, physically active, non-smoker, no family history of cancer. He came to me after a routine scan, caught something his primary physician had not anticipated. This man walked 30 minutes every morning without fail. His blood pressure was controlled. He was not overweight. By every measurable standard, he was doing everything right. And yet what was growing in his pancreas had been developing, by our estimate, for at least 7 years. When I reviewed his dietary history, which I make a point of doing with every pancreatic patient, I see there was a pattern, not a dramatic one, not fast food or sugar every night. A quiet, ordinary, deeply sensible pattern. He cooked in bulk every Sunday. He reheated throughout the week. Spinach, sausages, fried rice, every week, without fail, for 15 years, because he was practical, because he was careful, because every health guideline he had ever been given told him he was making smart choices. He was by everything he had been told. He was, but nobody had ever explained what happens to those foods chemically the second time heat touches them. Nobody connected those dots. Nobody sat him down and told him the truth. That is my mission, to bridge the gap between what the research actually shows and what patients are actually being told, between what I have seen across 2 decades in operating rooms and consultation rooms, and what you are hearing in a 12-minute appointment where your doctor has 17 other patients waiting. What I am about to share with you is not information I am required to give you. It is information I want to give you, because if you were sitting across from me in my office right now, this is exactly what I would say. Let us begin, and I want to start with the one that surprises people the most because it involves something that is almost certainly in your refrigerator right now, something you probably never once thought to question, and what it becomes the second time you apply heat to it is not what you think. Before I give you the 4 foods, I need you to understand what is actually happening inside your body, because without this foundation, the list will sound like a collection of random warnings. With it, you will never be able to look at your kitchen the same way again. Your pancreas is a long, flat gland tucked behind your stomach. You cannot feel it, you cannot see it. It functions silently and invisibly for most of a human lifetime, regulating insulin, producing the enzymes that break down everything you eat without producing a single noticeable symptom, until something goes catastrophically wrong. It is also, research shows, unusually sensitive to a specific class of chemical compounds called nitrosamines, also referred to as nitroso compounds, and a related family called heterocyclic amines. I want you to picture your pancreatic cells as a long, solid wall of bricks, healthy, orderly, intact. Now imagine that every time a nitrosamine compound reaches that wall, it chips a single brick, just one small chip, barely visible. But chip the same wall once a week, every week, for 10 years, and the structural integrity of that wall begins to fail. The cells that were once replicating in normal, orderly patterns begin to replicate in ways they should not. Once that process begins, once the cellular machinery starts producing abnormal copies of itself, we call that cancer. Here is what the published science shows. The IARC has classified nitrosamines as probable human carcinogens. Animal studies have demonstrated carcinogenicity, specifically targeting pancreatic tissue. Peer-reviewed research published in oncology journals has identified dietary nitroso compounds as one of the documented pathways contributing to pancreatic cancer risk. This is not a fringe theory. This is in the literature. Now, when certain foods are cooked once, the body can typically manage the small amounts of these compounds. Produced antioxidants in the food partially neutralize them. The liver processes some of the exposure. The insult is real but limited. Reheating changes the equation entirely. The protective compounds in the food are already degraded from the first cooking. The buffers are gone. The chemical reactions that produced small amounts of carcinogens the first time are accelerated the second time with nothing to slow them down. And in several of these foods, bacterial activity during cooling and refrigerated storage has already begun converting certain natural compounds into more reactive, more dangerous intermediate forms that a second application of heat then drives forward into carcinogens. What frustrates me, what truly keeps me up at night, is that this chemistry is not secret. It is published. It is documented. It's in journals that clinicians read and that patients never see. You are not failing your health. You have been failed by a system that profits from treating disease rather than preventing it. Now that you understand what is actually happening inside your body, let us name the 4 foods. I want to start with number 1. Because of all 4, this one has the most direct and documented connection to the cancer I just described. And there is a near certainty it is in your refrigerator right now. Number 1 is waiting. And what I am about to tell you about it, about what reheating does to this specific food at the chemical level, will make you think twice every single morning for the rest of your life. Number 1. Reheated processed meat, and the carcinogenic compounds it produces the second time heat touches it. Most people who eat processed meat, bacon, sausages, ham, hot dogs, deli slices, canned meat, any meat that has been cured, smoked, or preserved using nitrates and nitrites, understand on some level that these are not health foods. They eat them anyway, occasionally or regularly, and they carry a vague sense that they are not ideal. But here is the problem with that. These foods do not begin from a neutral chemical baseline. Because of how they are manufactured, preserved using nitrites that react with the amino acids in meat protein during processing, they already contain a meaningful concentration of nitrosamines before they ever reach your kitchen. The carcinogenic reaction begins during manufacturing, before the package is sealed. So when you reheat these foods, when you fry that leftover sausage or microwave that strip of bacon from Sunday morning, you are not adding heat to a neutral food. You are adding heat to a food that already contains documented carcinogenic compounds, and heat accelerates nitrosamine formation. The higher the temperature and the longer the duration, the more that reaction is driven forward. Research examining dietary nitroso compounds and pancreatic cancer risk found that high intake of these compounds was associated with elevated pancreatic cancer risk. Studies have specifically identified heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and nitrosamines produced by cooking processed meat at high temperatures as key mutagens compounds capable of causing direct genetic damage to cells. I had a patient 69 years old, a retired firefighter, a proud family man who cooked for his grandchildren every weekend. He came to me for a follow-up on some persistent digestive discomfort, told me he ate well, not too much red meat, vegetables most nights, but every single morning, without exception, he reheated leftover sausages from the previous evening's dinner, full power, microwave, 2 minutes. He had done it for years. He looked at me and said, "It's just a couple of sausages. What harm could it do?" The harm is not in a single morning. It is in 2 minutes of high heat applied to unitrosamine-containing food, 5 mornings a week for 15 years. That is thousands of individual exposures, thousands of instances of an accelerated carcinogenic chemical reaction without antioxidant buffers, without protective compounds, at maximum temperature. If you continue reheating processed meats at high heat 5 or more times per week, here is what is happening inside your body. Your pancreatic cells are receiving a repeated chemical insult from nitrosamine compounds that your body cannot fully neutralize. Structural damage accumulates at the cellular level. Over years, the risk of abnormal cellular replication in pancreatic tissue rises measurably. The solution is specific. Eat processed meats once freshly prepared, consumed immediately. If you must reheat them, use a low oven at 275 F rather than a microwave on full power. Never microwave processed meat on high, and monitor your weekly intake. The World Cancer Research Fund recommends no more than 3 servings of processed meat per week, not per day, per week. This is not about never eating bacon again. It is about understanding what you are doing to that food and to your body the second time you press that button. Number 2 is the one I almost did not include in this video. My colleagues will disagree with me on how I frame it, but after what I have seen, I owe it to you to say it. Because this one involves a food you eat specifically because it is good for you. And what reheating does too, it is a direct chemical reversal of everything you were trying to accomplish. Number 2. Reheated spinach and high nitrate leafy greens and the silent chemical transformation that turns a healthy food into the very thing you were trying to avoid. This is the one that stops people, because they reach for spinach precisely because it is good for them. They add it to everything: soups, stir-fries, scrambled eggs, pasta, because the advice they have received for decades is correct. Spinach is genuinely rich in iron, folate, vitamins, and antioxidants. Every bit of that is true. But here is the problem with that. Spinach contains naturally occurring nitrates. In fresh spinach, those nitrates are entirely benign, actually beneficial for blood pressure and cardiovascular function. That is not in dispute. What changes the story is storage and heat. When spinach is cooked and then allowed to cool even inside the refrigerator, bacterial activity and enzymatic reactions within the cooked vegetable begin converting those harmless nitrates into nitrites. This conversion does not stop. It happens continuously during storage. The longer the cooked spinach sits, even at refrigerator temperature, the more nitrite it accumulates. Now you apply heat a second time. 2 things happen simultaneously. The heat drives further nitrite formation from any remaining nitrates, and those accumulated nitrites react with the amino acids present in the spinach. Spinach has significant protein content, and that reaction produces nitrosamines. The food you are eating specifically to protect your health has been converted, through storage and reheating, into the same class of compound that research connects directly to pancreatic cancer risk. A study published in the journal Food specifically warned against storing boiled spinach for more than 12 hours even under refrigeration, precisely because of this nitrate to nitrite to nitrosamine conversion pathway. The same chemistry applies to celery, beetroot, kale, and carrots. Celery in particular contains exceptionally high concentrations of naturally occurring nitrates. When it is cooked into soups and stews and then reheated, as happens constantly in ordinary home cooking, each heating cycle drives that conversion further. I had a patient 62 years old, a retired school principal, meticulous about everything she did, including her diet. When I reviewed her dietary history during a gastrointestinal consultation, the pattern was clear. She cooked large batches of spinach and kale stir-fry twice a week and reheated portions throughout the following days. She had done this for years. Her reasoning was impeccable by every health guideline she had ever received. Nobody had ever told her the chemistry changes, that the very compound that makes spinach healthy in its fresh state becomes a carcinogenic precursor under storage and heat. If you continue reheating cooked spinach and high-nitrate greens regularly over months and years, you are delivering a repeated low-level nitrosamine load to your digestive system and pancreatic tissue stripped of the antioxidant protection that was present in the original vegetable because those protective compounds were degraded. In the first cooking, the solution is simple and completely achievable. Cook spinach and leafy greens in the quantity you will eat immediately that same meal. If you have leftover cooked spinach, eat it cold in a salad the following day. Cold does not drive the nitrosamine forming reaction. Heat does. If you make large batches of soup or stew containing leafy greens, portion and freeze them immediately rather than refrigerating and reheating repeatedly. One simple shift, that is all this takes, and it removes one of the most ironic sources of dietary carcinogen exposure in an otherwise genuinely healthy diet. Now, before I give you number 3, I need you to hold on for a moment, because what comes next involves something that most people already suspect is dangerous, but they suspect it for the wrong reason entirely, and that misunderstanding leaves the real danger completely unaddressed. Stay with me. Number 3. Reheated cooking oils. Fried foods reheated from the previous day, and the accumulating genotoxic load that compounds with every single heating cycle. Most people understand vaguely that reusing cooking oil is not ideal. They have heard something about it, they suspect it at a general level. What most people do not understand is the specific chemistry of why and precisely what that chemistry produces inside the human body. Here is what actually happens. When a polyunsaturated cooking oil, sunflower, corn, soybean, or canola is heated to cooking temperature, a process called lipid peroxidation begins. The double bonds in the polyunsaturated fatty acids react with oxygen and heat to produce a cascade of oxidized compounds, aldehydes, specifically acrolein and 4-hydroxy-non and al, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and acrylamide in the presence of starchy foods. These compounds are genotoxic. That means they cause direct damage to DNA, not indirect, not theoretical direct, structural damage to the genetic material inside your cells. Now imagine your cooking oil as a sponge. The first time you heat it, that sponge absorbs a certain level of contamination from the oxidation process. The second time you heat it, or when you reheat food that was cooked in it, you are starting from an already contaminated baseline, the smoke point of the oil, the temperature at which it begins to visibly break down lowers with each heating cycle, which means the oil reaches its toxic threshold faster, at lower temperatures, every subsequent time it is heated. When fried food is reheated, particularly in a microwave, the surface temperature becomes uneven. Some areas of the food reach extremely high temperatures, others barely warm. The scorched areas produce the highest concentrations of all 3 classes of harmful compounds: heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and acrylamide. And this scorching often occurs at a microscopic level, producing no visible browning, no smell you would notice. You do not see it, you do not taste it, but it is happening. I had a patient 71 years old, a retired restaurant owner who had spent his career understanding food at a level most people never do. He came to me with escalating fatigue and chronic digestive complaints. His diet was, by his own description, traditional and practical. He cooked large batches of fried chicken, fried fish, and fried potatoes every few days and reheated portions throughout the week. He had done this his entire adult life. What he did not know, what nobody had ever told him, was that each reheating cycle was compounding the genotoxic load from the previous one, that the DNA damage being caused by those aldehydes and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons did not reset between meals, it accumulated. If you continue reheating fried foods regularly across years, you are exposing your cells to a compounding load of genotoxic compounds that interact directly with DNA, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in a slow, cumulative cellular process that builds over time. The solution is clear. Do not reheat fried foods. Eat them once fresh, immediately after cooking. If you must reheat, use an oven at 300 F, which warms the food evenly without scorching surface areas the way a microwave does. Discard used frying oil after every single use, never reuse it, and where possible, switch to more. Heat stable oils. Avocado oil and refined coconut oil have significantly higher smoke points and produce fewer oxidized compounds under heat. You do not have to stop eating fried food. Eat it once, fresh, then let it go. Number 4 is where this all comes together, and I want to be direct. This one is fundamentally different from the 3 I have described. The mechanism is different. Most people have never heard of it, and the consequence, over years of repeated exposure, connects to a cancer pathway that almost never enters the mainstream conversation. Everything I have said up until now was leading here. I have been building toward this. Everything I have told you about processed meat, about spinach, about cooking oils, those risks operate through chemistry. Through compounds your body absorbs and cannot fully eliminate, the fourth food works through an entirely different mechanism. And the reason I saved it for last is that it represents the most universally dismissed, most under-discussed food safety risk in everyday cooking, not because the science is weak, but because the danger is completely invisible. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you cannot taste it. The food is rice, not rice itself, improperly stored and reheated rice. And here is the mechanism that most people will go their entire lives without ever being told. When cooked rice is left to cool even briefly at room temperature, spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus, which survive the original boiling process and remain dormant in the cooked grain, begin to activate and multiply. These spores are heat resistant. Boiling does not kill them. They simply wait. As the rice cools from boiling temperature down through the danger zone, the range between 40°F and 140°F in which bacterial growth is most rapid, the bacteria multiply and produce toxins. Two types. One causes vomiting within hours. The other causes diarrhea and is produced specifically during the storage phase, not after reheating, not in the pot, during the hours the cooked rice sits cooling on your counter or in your refrigerator. Here is the part that changes everything. When you reheat the rice the next day on the stovetop, in the microwave, at full temperature, you kill the bacteria. The heat does its job, but the toxins they have already produced during storage are heat stable. They survive microwave reheating. They survive stovetop reheating. The bacteria are dead. The toxins remain and you eat them. I will be honest with you. When I first encountered Bacillus cereus in medical school, I treated it as a footnote, an acute food safety issue, unpleasant, survivable, not serious. It took years of clinical practice and too many patients with chronic unexplained gastrointestinal disease before I began taking this mechanism as seriously as I do now. In the short term, these toxins cause nausea, vomiting, cramping, diarrhea. Most people blame a stomach bug and never make the connection in the long term, and this is what the conversation almost always misses. Repeated low-level exposure to heat-stable bacterial toxins contributes to chronic intestinal inflammation. And chronic inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract is one of the most extensively documented, most replicated pathways to gastrointestinal cancer in all of oncology. Every time the intestinal lining is irritated by these toxins, the inflammatory response leaves microscopic cellular damage. Once a week, every week, for 10 years. That accumulated damage creates exactly the cellular environment in which malignant transformation becomes possible. What frustrates me, what truly keeps me up at night, is that this is not theoretical. The connection between chronic intestinal inflammation and gastrointestinal cancer is mainstream oncology. It is in the major journals. It is discussed at oncology conferences. And yet the role of repeated dietary bacterial toxin exposure in maintaining that inflammatory state is a conversation that almost never happens with patients. I had a patient 67 years old, a retired accountant, meticulous in every area of his life. He came to me with a history of recurring gastrointestinal distress that no one had been able to fully explain. Non-smoker, moderate diet, well-managed blood pressure. When we finally did a detailed dietary review, the pattern emerged. He cooked a large pot of rice every Sunday. It sat on the counter for 1 to 2 hours before going into the refrigerator. He reheated portions throughout the week. Every week, for years. Simple, practical. What millions of people do without a second thought. We changed the protocol: cool rice within 1 hour and refrigerate it immediately. Store it for no more than 24 hours. Reheat once only to steaming hot temperature throughout, not just warm in the center. Cook smaller quantities, so less is left over. 6 months later, his recurring gastrointestinal symptoms had reduced significantly. A pharmaceutical company cannot patent cool your rice within 1 hour. There is no drug for reheat it only once. There is no profit margin in this information. So it's in the literature while people continue making the same choices week after week and wondering why their gut never quite feels right. We are almost at the end. But before I close, I need to say something directly to you, something that is not on this list. Something I say to every patient who sits across from me in my consultation room. Stay with me for 2 more minutes, because this part matters more than any item on the list does. Let me bring this together. 3 points from everything I have shared today, the 3 I want you to carry with you. First, reheating processed meats at high temperature accelerates nitrosamine formation in a food that already contains carcinogenic compounds from the manufacturing process. The exposure compounds with every instance. Eat them once fresh. Never microwave them on high. Second, Reheating cooked spinach and high-nitrate leafy greens converts their naturally occurring nitrates into nitrosamines through a completely preventable heat-driven reaction. Eat your leftover cooked greens cold the next day. Do not heat them a second time. Third, improperly stored rice delivers heat-stable bacterial toxins that survive every reheating method and that accumulate as chronic intestinal inflammation across years of repeated exposure. Cool rice within 1 hour. Refrigerate for no more than 24 hours. Reheat once only to fully steaming temperature throughout. Now I want to step away from the list. I have been a doctor for over 20 years, and the thing I have learned, the thing that no medical school teaches, that does not appear in any textbook, that no exam ever tested me on, is that the most dangerous thing for a person's health is not a disease. It is the belief that change is too difficult, or too late, or not worth the effort. I have sat across from patients who received a devastating diagnosis and looked at me and said, "Why did nobody warn me about this sooner?" And I have sat across from patients who made small, specific, consistent changes and came back to me months or years later genuinely different, not dramatically younger, not transformed overnight, but present, still here, still living their lives on their own terms. The 4 changes I described today are not dramatic. They do not require you to rebuild your kitchen or abandon the foods you love. They require you to cool your rice faster, heat your spinach cold, buy fresh portions of processed meat instead of reheating them, and discard your frying oil after a single use. That is it. That is the entire ask, for specific, manageable, permanent habit changes, and your pancreas, your intestinal lining, and your DNA will respond to those changes in ways that matter across the months and years ahead. You deserve not just to avoid disease. You deserve the information that makes avoidance possible. And that information too often does not reach you in a rushed appointment or a generic health pamphlet. Your pancreas does not send warning letters. Your intestinal lining does not give you a preview of the damage accumulating inside it. The window you have right now, this moment, today, is worth using, not tomorrow, today. If this video reached you, if something I said today changes how you cook this week, do not let it be the last conversation. Every week, I share information that your doctor does not have the appointment time to tell you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, because the next video I am releasing may be the most important one yet. Next, I want to talk to you about 5 breakfast foods that are routinely marketed as heart-healthy for adults over 60 and that the research increasingly suggests are doing the opposite. That conversation continues directly from what you learned today. Do not miss it. Take care of yourself, because you deserve not just a longer life but a better one. I will see you in the next video.